Welcome to From Ambition to Action, Eurogas's Renewable Gas Conference and Barbecue. It's a little dark in here, but that's to keep it nice and cool. And maybe first thing to say is do close the doors when you pop out, because we have air conditioning in here. It might not feel like it, but it is a lot cooler in here. It is a lot cooler in here than outside. So just keep the doors closed, and we'll try and keep it that way. So we're here to talk about delivering on the EU's 2030 targets for renewable gases. I emphasize 2030. I'm conscious we had a 2040 proposal out today, but we probably have quite a lot to talk about just focusing on the next couple of years. And ultimately, delivering on those next couple of years is probably going to decide in large part what we manage to do for the decade after. So the focus of our discussion is going to be how do we get things up and moving. My name is Sonja van Rensen. I'm here to moderate for you this afternoon. I'm a climate energy journalist based here in Brussels, and I'm also Chief Strategy Officer at Carbon Pulse, which is a news agency specialized in carbon markets and the broader net zero agenda. And we have new products out this afternoon, so take a look at our site this evening if you have a moment. So we've got we have a number of presentations and keynotes, and then we have three sort of bulkier sessions, one focused on demand. How do we build up demand, unlock demand in industry in particular? A second one focused on supply and focused on increasing the supply of biomethane in particular. And finally, a third session focused on outside of Europe, and are there examples that we could look to where governments, industries are succeeding in scaling up hydrogen, biomethane, and their derivatives to really get this market going. The final thing to say is we want today to be as interactive as possible, so we're going to be putting some questions to you. I'm going to be trying to engage the panelists in a conversation, so we're going to try to avoid the lengthy opening statements, the monologues, and try and make it as genuine a conversation as possible. So there will be time for questions. All of it's physical. There's no Slido, no apps, and so forth. We have a few microphones in the room, so I would say be ready to put your hand up. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Cristian Signoretto, Eurogas's president, to give you a warm welcome to this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonja, and thanks to all of you for being so brave to come here with this, very hot weather. But be reassured that we have organized for you a shower at 5 p.m. more or less, exactly when we are barbecuing, so that to cool you down and to cool us down. It also because I think the combination of this event, coupled between a policy dialogue that we are going to have today and then a barbecue, is actually a good way to wrap up the first half of the year, which has been pretty, I would say, hectic for a number of things, surely on a geopolitical level, but also on a policy level, especially in Europe, but also, I would say, in US, with all things which are happening across the Atlantic. Today, our focus will be on understanding better what's the role of renewable low-carbon gases for reaching net zero in the European agenda. You know that at Eurogas we do believe strongly on the fact that we need molecules into the system in order to make sure that the system delivers what we promised, and we are going to, I think, discuss this even more during the conference. From a more broader perspective, I mean, the challenges facing Europe are actually becoming complex and complex every day that goes ahead. So on the one hand, we are pressing ahead with European energy transition. On the other hand, we see geopolitical events popping out and changing the landscape of the energy scenario very abruptly. We have security concerns across our border, which are actually putting strain on our budgets in order to make sure that we can defend ourselves. And on top of that, we also have a growing trade dispute, or I would say at least wrestling, with actually some of our closest allies, which are also creating some uncertainties around the business future. So in a moment like this, clearly making sure that we strike the right balance when it comes to energy transition, which takes into account all the elements of the energy transition, which is affordability, security, competitiveness of our industry, making sure that our national budgets and government borrowing is kept on strict rules, is clearly crucial. Because without that balance, we cannot guarantee the support of our citizens, and we cannot get ahead with this momentum. And first thing that I like to point out is that our energy policies should be based on credible and reasonable future scenarios in order for us, for the industry, and for the policymaker to plan in advance. And yet, I think if you look at the projection of the gas demand, which is made by our policymakers in Europe, is surely difficult to grasp. So just to put numbers in perspective, in the next 5 years, our policymakers are expecting the gas demand in Europe to fall by 140 BCM of gas in the next 5 years. And just to compare this with the last 5 years of gas demand, this is going to double what the decrease that we have seen in the last 5 years, in which we had a pandemic and also we had a war looming at our doors. So this is something that it takes a bit of boldness to still believe that is going to be achieved, especially based on the fact that we have seen that it's difficult, it's more than, I would say it's intrinsically difficult to substitute the last mile of gas in the system. Think about the hard-to-abate sector, think about the residential sector. So the history tells us that it's not easy to penetrate 100% of that sector easily, because it takes people to spend money on new appliances, which is sometimes is not as easy as we can say we can see. And also there are future developments around reshoring manufacturing activity, especially when it comes to the defense sector, or when it comes to the artificial intelligence sector, which can actually increase the demand of energy. And in that case, gas still could be a bridge for that demand. So I say in this regard, we think that the projection should be much more thought through, should be maybe even revised, honestly, in order to make sure that as an industry we take into consideration what's going to be needed by our citizens, by our customers in the future. And as Eurogas, as well, I was saying before, we do believe that in this scenario, gas and molecules in general can play a role. We know that at the very beginning, like today, methane is still the vast majority of the molecules which are powering the European systems. But along the road, clearly those molecules will be substituted gradually by low-carbon renewable gases, which are going to make sure that the system keeps being reliable, keeps being sustainable and affordable for our citizens. In fact, we have recently, 1 year ago, completed a study together with Frontier Economics to understand and to assess what is the best path forward in order to achieve the goal that the European Commission has set itself, but making sure that the system keeps being competitive and reliable. And guess what? The importance of molecules into the system have emerged as an important element for a number of reasons. One is that having molecules in the systems allows us to be more safe in terms of security of supply. Think about what happened in Spain. Recently I was commenting before with some of you that we had three blackouts in Italy in the last week in small part of the cities because of the high demand which was generated by this heat wave. So and if you look at the utilization rate of the power plants, gas-fired power plants in these days, you see how high is that, because they have to cope with the demand that we are witnessing these days. So molecules are providing reliability, are providing security of supply. They are also providing, let's say, a cheap solution, because if we rely on having a full electrification of the system, according to our, let's say, analysis, the cost of the system will be much higher than making sure that we can preserve a dual system, commodity system into the energy complex. So, so we do strongly believe that molecules are needed, but clearly we need to have a policy framework which allows this business to really grow. And to our opinion, there are three major items that needs to be tackled urgently in order for this business to grow. One is to make sure that we sustain the demand development. So clearly, without demand, there is not enough pressure for the industry to deliver these green gases. And for demand to be there, we need, let's say, incentives, subsidies. And this is, the story that we have seen also on the renewable side. So in the end, for a new industry to scale up and to kick in, you need to have a flare to be triggered. And I think this is something that the policymakers needs to take into consideration, in due consideration. Second, we need to have a cross-border trade which is seamless. We like open markets. We think what we have built in the gas business, in the methane business, has been very resilient. It's true that we have seen very high prices, but if you think about it, the gas market itself was able to cope with the disappearance of almost 130 BCM of gas in Europe. And the market was able to cope with that. So we like open market. We like to get price signals. So we need to make sure that also the new energies, the new gases, are also set in that same of situation. So they need to be interchanged. They need to be exchanged freely across borders. And the third thing that I think we need to have is pragmatic methodologies. So, I still remember the discussion around green hydrogen, a lot of ideology, a lot of criteria and requirements, which were actually very tough to manage from a business perspective because the industry is still at its infancy. So for low carbon hydrogen, I think we need to be much more pragmatic. Make sure that even if the gas can be decarbonized 50, 60, 70%, whatever it is, it's still good for the environment. It's still good for the industry because it can, let's start off. But we need to make sure that the policymaker acknowledge that even this variety, these differences in the low carbon gases needs to be sustained. So I think, these are the principles that we are, as Eurogas, advocating in Brussels. We are seeing, surely we're seeing more ears willing to listen to us. It's true that the gas is is an industry which is coming from the fossil fuel, but I think the agenda of renewing, of decarbonizing this industry is surely being much more understood. So we need to be focused on that in order to make sure that also these policies will also allow the industry and the low carbon gases to kick off as we want. So with that said, I really thanks for also the people that are going to interact with us and participate into the panels. So we are looking forward for receiving their inputs. And I wish to all of you a pleasant conference and especially a very pleasant barbecue right after. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for opening for us this afternoon. We're going to go straight on then with a keynote presentation from Roland Kuchler, Senior Vice President for Strategic Portfolio Management at CEFE, Securing Energy for Europe. Someone with a lot of experience in the gas industry, trading, optimization, risk management, commodity market analysis, market design, and so forth. He ran one of Europe's largest gas trading desks at Uniper prior to joining CEFE, and currently works there, occupying himself with macroeconomic analysis and portfolio development and management. So looking forward to hearing how you see the future.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here in Brussels today. Hot and sunny Brussels, I should say. Thanks very much for putting the ventilators up here. That makes it a little bit more pleasant as well. I'm here today to talk about some trends and views that we are seeing around the markets, across the markets, and around the energy transition. And hopefully those trends will also set the stage for the panel discussions later on as well. Over the last 12 months, we have seen significant shifts across the industry. We have seen new governments taking office in several key countries. And with that, we have also seen new energy dynamics emerging. We have also seen a notable change in sentiment around the energy transition. And please allow me to spend a couple of minutes on the term energy transition, because I'm not quite happy with the term energy transition itself. The energy transition is commonly described to use the shift from fossil fuels to renewable sources. I think energy evolution, or for the sake of it, transformation, may be a more useful term to use. Energy evolution, I think, is more accurate and more forward-looking to what we are actually seeing in the markets and in the world. I Googled energy transition and transition. It stands for a defined pathway with a fixed end state. It implies we know where we're heading to, and one system is replaced by another cleaner one. But I think the reality, as you all know, is much more complex. What we are seeing is a dynamic, adaptive progress, which is shaped by technological progress, environmental goals, economic pressure, and evolving customer demand. The evolution we are seeing does not exclude fossil fuels. It encourages them to be integrated together with cleaner technologies like carbon capturing, hydrogen, and biogases. We also don't know what the final game is. We don't know what the final energy mix will look like, right? Precisely that's why we need to stay open-minded, and we need to embrace different pathways and technologies which are driving our decarbonization ambitions, security of energy, and affordability. We shouldn't think in binary terms, the old versus the new. We should be open to different pathways and different solutions to achieve our environmental goals. This evolution has become a lot more grounded over the last 12 months. We are seeing increased pragmatism and realism in how the challenges in our markets are approached. While decarbonization remains critical and a defined objective, the pathway, how we achieve it, will continue to shift. And more critically, I think affordability has become to the forefront of the discussion, particularly here in Europe. So with this, let's look at some of the trends and driving forces that we are seeing in the markets, particularly here in Europe. So let's begin with the European emissions. So the EU has set a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to the levels in 1990. Currently, we have achieved already a reduction of 37%. So that's good news. And given the trajectory and all the national plans which have been submitted so far, we are on course to achieve a reduction of 54% by 2030. So that's good news again. Another key EU climate goal is to reduce energy consumption and or improve energy efficiency. The EU target is to reduce the energy consumption by 2030 by 11.7%. Currently, we have reduced energy consumption for various reasons to 9.4%. However, given all the plans that have been submitted and measures which will be implemented over the next couple of years, and also the projected increase in demand over the next few years, we will only achieve a reduction of energy consumption of 8.1%, falling short of this EU target. And then lastly, on the right, let's look at the renewables. Renewables in the energy mix. So the EU has set a target that 42.5% of all energy should come from renewable sources. with all the national plans submitted again and implemented, we are well on track to achieve that goal. So that's also good news. However, despite all the renewables, we will still need fossil fuels in the future energy mix. So let's look at the fossil fuels and natural gas in particular. So despite the push for renewables, we believe natural gas is and will be playing an important part of the future energy mix. Over the last 10 years, and touching on Christian's word earlier on, over the last 10 years, the natural gas demand has been quite robust. And in the last 12 months, we have even seen a slightly tick up in demand. Looking forward, with renewables gaining more ground, we do expect that European gas demand will fall slightly. And I highlight slightly or moderately. We do not expect a drastic decline in European gas demand. We do believe that gas demand will persist in the energy mix. On this, I would also like to highlight that the gas industry itself is strongly committed to decarbonize its own supply chains. And I'm very confident that we will see improved emission footprint, particularly on the upstream and midstream emissions. So I am confident that the way we deliver gas in the future will be very different to how we deliver gas today. In particular, it will have a much lower emission footprint. We have also seen that European emissions have been going down over the last couple of years. European emissions have been going down despite stable gas demand. To me, this suggests that decarbonization and natural gas do not necessarily need to conflict. They can coexist together with cleaner technologies and practices applied. So hopefully this gave you a bit of an overview on some of the benchmark EU climate targets and where we stand with them. So let's look where is the industry? What are the companies doing? We have all heard over the last most likely 12 months that there's a slowdown in the energy transition, evolution, whatever you want to call it. I was looking for a study that kind of quantifies that perception. And I came across a study from Carbon Tracker. They have been evaluating, analyzing the ESG performance of 30 of the largest oil and gas companies in the world in context of their Paris Agreement alignment. So naturally, oil and gas companies would have started it on the right, being quite misaligned with the Paris Agreement. Over the last couple of years, we have seen a shift in the trend, those companies trying to move more to the center, eventually becoming a little bit more green. This was underpinned by their investment plans and also future production plans, focusing more on renewable sources. However, also this study shows that in the last 12 months, there has been a reversal. The companies are moving back to the right, to the far right. And this is again highlighted by their investment plans, by the projects that have achieved final investment decisions, and future production plans, which contain, again, more fossil fuels. So I think this symbolizes a broader change in the industry with more pragmatism and the change towards leveraging more existing resources and existing technologies. So with all of this, how do we accelerate and how do we go on about our decarbonization efforts? One of the answers here could be carbon capturing. Yeah? Europe here in this space has large potential in carbon capturing. Salt caverns, old depleted oil and gas fields, they would provide enough reservoirs to store CO2 underground for generations to come. I also feel that in the last 12 months, we have seen a shift in sentiment in the public debate, but also in policies, and also in investments. So we are seeing more investments going into that space. We are seeing more projects being developed and so forth. So with this, I think I just leave it here for more discussions coming in the upcoming panel discussions. Maybe a final statement or question to the room and then also to the panel discussion later is, so is gas in its different forms, including biogases and in combination with different carbon capturing technology, not more than a bridging or transitioning fuel, but really is a long-term solution? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Could we see a show of hands, just out of curiosity, in response to Erland's last question? Is gas more than a bridging fuel, if you take into account how it could be delivered, the role it could and perhaps needs to play going forward? Who says yes? Okay. I think that's most people. Who says no? Okay. So most people, maybe that's no surprise, in this room see a long-term future for gas as part of as you put it, an evolution of the energy system rather than a transition to something perhaps quite different. We're going to go into our first panel now, so focused on how to create a strong end-user market for low-carbon gases, so hydrogen and biomethane, and also the hydrogen derivatives. I'd like to call up the panel for that. So that's Marcel Steinbach, Adolfo Aiello, and Antoine Oxa. If you'd like to come up and take a seat. I'll give you each... So I'll give you each a quick intro. So next to me we have Marcel Steinbach, so Senior Vice President, Head of Regulatory Affairs at CEFE, so a colleague of Roland's, who you just heard from. So he's somebody who works with CEFE's CEO, basically in charge of all regulatory affairs. And as part of that, that involves also accelerating the group's move towards renewable gases. Next to him in the middle, Antoine Oxa, Director General at Fertilizers Europe, has been with the organization for the past 15 years. And prior to that, spent 8 years actually working within the fertilizer business, notably also in R&D and licensing. So comes with a good view on the technological possibilities and innovations, some of which also will be needed to ultimately create, I guess, a fertilizer industry that is around for a low carbon or a zero carbon society. And finally, Adolfo Aiello, Deputy Director General at Eurofer, has been deputy there for the past 3 years, has headed up Eurofer, so representing the European steel industry, headed up its climate and energy portfolio for far longer, so comes with a lot of experience on things like the EU ETS, CBAM, renewables, efficiency, and previously has been around in Brussels for longer, also familiar with other energy intensives, notably also ceramics via Ceram Uni. So a welcome to all of you. What we wanted to do then to kick off this panel was, rather than starting with a question to you, we wanted to start with a question to all of you with us today. And I will come to the panel in a moment to get their views. But can we get up the question that we wanted to ask to the room? If not, I'm going to read it out. I've got it here. There we go. Is there currently sufficient demand pull in the EU for the biomethane market to grow and ideally to thrive? And all bets are off, although I'm guessing I know what the answer is going to be. So who says, yes, we do have some strong demand out there and we see that pulling the biomethane market upwards? Yeah, I see a hand there. Are there other hands out there? Okay, thank you. And who says no? In that case, I guess that's going to be everyone else. So majority is still skeptical of demand. Okay, and then second question. Same question, different gas. What about hydrogen? How do things look for hydrogen? Do we see sufficient demand pull for hydrogen? Nobody sees that. So everyone's a no. Okay. I wonder if we have a microphone, the lady here, would you just like to, because on biomethane, just like to just very briefly tell us, I guess, why you do think that there is demand? Can we get a microphone? Oh. Just up here at the very front. And then we'll come to the panel and get your views. We can get you one otherwise.
Hi, yes, my name is Teresa Bonnekamp. I'm working in RWE in the LNG desk, and we've been trading biomethane for several years. It's true, it depends.
Yeah. So can we turn the volume up a tiny bit? It's hard to hear, I think, because we're facing a fan. It's not so easy to hear. Yeah.
Try to raise my voice. But yes, in RWE, we've been trading biomethane for quite some time, and now we're seeing more demand, especially from the maritime industry for bio-LNG, for bunkering. And it's true, there's more demand for subsidized biomethane, which is much more competitive, and there's still a bit of a gap to bridge for some projects to take FID. But we definitely see the gap being closer and closer as compared to hydrogen that still has some way to go.
Okay, so especially from the maritime industry, so you do see that gap, that pull gap closing for biomethane, still some way to go, and in contrast for hydrogen, that gap is still very much or more so present. Okay, thank you. Let's go to our panelists then. Your view on those questions. Marcel, go ahead.
Well, first of all, good afternoon to everybody. I'm really glad that we as SAFE can support the conference here again. I think it's super important. I think 3 years ago we talked about, can infrastructure handle it? Would be another question. Infrastructure can handle it. Flow is being filled. For those who were skeptics 2 years or 3 years ago, you can check it up and I don't know, put your hand on it and see how it's working. Last year we talked about, is the regulation up for it, especially for the low-carbon imports? Tough message here is the projects which we talked about last year are on hold now. So basically, regulation messed that one up. But of course, they always have time to catch up. I think it's really important, and that's why it's so important to think about the customers. Now, you asked it very specifically, demand pull. And I would say, as SIF, of course, we have over 250 industrial customers, refineries. When we go back to the core network, and I think that's really something, most of these customers called us and said, I'm 30 kilometers away from the core network. How can I get the hydrogen to my plant, my use case or whatever? And I think that's a good sign. The interest is there. Also, the interest, of course, is there, and I mean, Roland has said, I mean, the interest is there for energy primarily, for affordable and reliable energy, and also something that will make the investors happy, which is, in fact, a sustainable solution. And that is, I think, where we need to think about, of course, we need all solutions. We need all green and renewable and low-carbon molecules that we can get, and there's some really good things about it. The way of how we're getting there is actually also really important, but the customers in the end, they just really care for some climate relevant solution. And I think for that it's really important. Now, what we said, and I think also there with the ambition, this is really important, and especially when I woke up this morning, I listened to the radio a little bit, and I remind you, not only is it some heavy lifting to be here at the conference today, but never so early, so hot. So I would actually add ambition to action, I would say actually requirement to act. And I think that's really important, and I think also our industrial customers are looking for pragmatic solutions, as Christian said, and I think we are here to discuss some of the pragmatism today.
Yep, we can go into some of those solutions in a moment. Antoine.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. If I look from fertilizers industry perspective, we very clearly, we need hydrogen at the end of the day. That's what we need to combine it with air, nitrogen, to make all fertilizers. So there is a demand for the molecule itself. Now, if the way you phrase it, the question, is there a demand for biomethane or, I guess, renewable hydrogen? I would rather want to put the question there the other way around. Is there enough capacity to come with this molecule at affordable price? Because what I'm hearing when it comes to hydrogen, for example, a renewable hydrogen is 4 times more expensive. As fertilizer industry, there is 0 chance we can take it, simply because our customers that are farmers cannot afford it. And I don't run fast enough to be brave enough to say to a farmer, your fertilizer will be twice the price it is today. So we have to change things in the way the market is structured if we want things to happen as it is. At the end, it's a question of affordability or obligation.
Yeah.
We have to find what is the best solution on this. But the market in the sense of methane gas and hydrogen being used today, yes, it is being used today, and yes, it will be used in the future.
Okay.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I think I will echo most of what Antoine said, but starting more broadly, I would say, you're asking here demand for low carbon gases. I'm afraid that if I invite you to the Eurofer General Assembly and I ask my members about demand for green steel, I will get most likely the same answer, no. If we go to other associations, heat pumps or solar panels, probably, a lot of these green technologies do not see enough demand in Europe. And that's why I would say each of us within each own sector needs to go beyond our boxes and try to develop a collective solution. Because ultimately, what we see as in the steel sector is that it's the overall EU business case that has to make sense for investors. So let's say, we consider ourselves as an upstream sector, relatively upstream. Of course, you are actually more upstream than us in some cases. But on the other side, we are competing with international competitors, very often with unfair competition. So we need to make sure that the entire value chain, and as you know, steel is used in many value chains, automotive, construction, machineries, appliances, and so on. So it's important that the decarbonization signal that is given to the value chain lands to the final consumer, but allows all the steps of the value chain to remain in Europe. The highest risk we see is that with the usual Brussels approach of identifying a problem, solving it with a target, it has very big risks because actually you are solving the problem on paper. But actually, if this paper result is not matched by the reality, then you are contributing to the industrialization. So I think we do need to cooperate to improve demand. From our side, be aware that we are subject to the ETS as steel. We are the largest sector under ETS among the manufacturing sectors. So we do have a very harsh stick, the carbon price. But what we are lacking is a carrot that makes the overall business case for the decarbonization workable within the EU. That's my first round of answer, I would say.
Okay. So probably a few things to unpack there. I mean, since a year ago, we have an array of initiatives designed to help to support European industry. We have most notably the Clean Industrial Deal. We had an Affordable Energy Action Plan. We have an Industrial Decarbonization Bank that is supposed to be created. We just had a reform to state aid guidelines. We have, I guess, secondary legislation, delegated acts. Those are probably more problematic than helpful so far, underway for hydrogen, for example. But there is a whole, I guess, a shift in narrative, and there's a whole, spread of actions out there. And yet, as you say, projects are on hold. So is it that none of all of these initiatives need more time to come to fruition, or do we simply still lack the solutions that ultimately we need to get affordable energy and to unlock some of these projects to give you something that you can work with when it comes to working with farmers, and in your case too, something that can ultimately give you a future in Europe.
Last year I said the project, the volume, the supply is there. So, but how can we untap the volume? And I think this is something that should be at the center of the question. First of all, why is the hydrogen cost? And you say rightly, of course, with these prices, oh my God, this is going to be quite difficult. But of course, the promise that the electricity industry made of cheap and abundant green electricity has never delivered. At the moment, we're still sort of in the middle of the summer with big sun or so. We're actually talking about 80 to 100 euros on the day-ahead market for electricity. That is not cheap, and it's also, in many ways, also not abundant and green. Because in the end, we have, of course, quite a large fossil fleet that's working at the moment to cover for all of the differences. Now, with that electricity setup, of course, the question is, of course, maybe we can just wait for the electricity market design to deliver. But of course, we don't have the time because the big thing, the decarbonization of our own industry, is also really important. Now we're faced with the simple thing. In Europe, let's say, simple example, 1 kilogram of hydrogen, 10 euros. And I can understand you, Adolfo, that you say 10 euros way too expensive. Now, what the effect is that, unfortunately, all our import partners, they're looking at us, say, like 10 euros, I can offer you 9.99 euros. And so there, I think it's simple economics, demand and supply. Basically, of course, you're going to beat that price, but we need to be much more competitive. Now, for the projects, and I think this is also quite important, of course, and I think I say it here again, we need to look for projects below 5 euros a kilogram. That's something that I think that's a benchmark, and we need to tell those projects that are way above that, they need to rethink their project. Because in the end, it's Adolfo's members who actually need to buy that hydrogen or clean or renewable gas. Now, is that going to be something that we can quickly do? Now, even with our partners, these are large infrastructure investments for a very long time. And I think this is something when the real gap, and I think that's what is there, is that the investment is so good that actually we need much more confidence. And I have to say that regulation, and especially the sort of like ongoing, identity crisis on the Low Carbon Delegated Act, that is not really helping. We need straightforward stuff. And you said all of those great initiatives, but if we, and I know many of the experts here discussing with us also in our renewable and low carbon working group and at Eurogas, and of course, the real substance, the real beef of actually helping us is actually very, very, very light. And I think that's something that we can give back here. We need this, we need a framework, a confidence building framework that actually whoever is going to invest knows that in 20 years, yes, we are going to go that way. Coming back to Roland saying the transition requires a clear target model, I have the feeling that many don't really believe in this target model anymore.
Dolphin?
Yeah, you mentioned a shift of narrative. That's a perfect word to describe what is happening in Brussels. And for us, European associations sitting comfortably at our desks here, this gives us already some hope. The problem is that our CEOs that have to justify multi-billion investments in Europe, while their shareholders could do exactly the same in third countries, sometimes for half of the cost, they have a very, very hard life just justifying such investments with the narrative. So the real problem, I would say the source of the problem is twofold, the substance and the timing. We need to shift from narrative to substance and from medium-term solutions to short-term solutions. We have seen many times, if you speak about steel, we had, beginning of the year, an excellent steel and metals action plan. Now, in EU law jargon, this is just a communication. It's very nice, as you say, very nice narrative, describing exactly all our challenges, mentioning possible solutions, but of course, as I said, investment decisions are not unlocked by narrative. To mention one example, historically steel consumed, well, before COVID, I would say, roughly 30 BCM of gas, around 1/3 of it from the grid, and 2/3 from our own process gases. The core of this depends on our ability to keep our competitiveness in the EU. If you look at the last 10 years, we have lost 15 million tons of positive trade balance, and we have turned into a negative 10 million balance. And by the end of the year, the Commission has to publish, a solution for the global steel overcapacity. Now, if this solution is good and effective on the ground, then we have a business case to produce steel in Europe and sell it in Europe and to third countries and buy gas for the future. If that solution or that proposal is too weak and imports will keep coming to Europe with subsidized, dumped prices, then of course we will have little business case in Europe and lower demand for gas as well. So it's, as you can see, it goes far beyond energy. It touches industrial policy, trade policy, state aid, and so on. But each of them with very, very concrete proposals, not only with narratives.
Yeah. Okay. I will continue on this, but I think what we are really missing is pragmatism in Europe. We are having a lot of initiatives, and I welcome, of course, some of them, but what is really coming? And then you've mentioned, I think, delegated act. Delegated act, the way they are now, they are project killers. It's impossible to build an industrial project that fits within these delegated acts. And I'm talking about the RFMBO delegated act and the one that is coming for low carbon hydrogen. Let me take an example of a fertilizer producer in Lithuania. It's a big company there. They convinced their member states, Lithuania, to give them a subsidy, 112 million euros. It's huge for Lithuania, big effort. Money is there, the project cannot go because of the delegated act. It's too strict because it's impossible to have a business case. Even if you pile up this plus other support, it's not enough to go to the market and be competitive with what is today the market, because on fertilizers, Europe, it's an open market. So we need to have real pragmatism and be much more open and relaxed to start up things here in Europe. Another thing, for example, for ages in Europe, it has been green, green, green. But dark green is the enemy of light green or of blue. Because we wanted to go totally green, we're not doing the blue. As fertilizer industry, it's extremely frustrating for me because we capture the CO2. When you produce ammonia, we have pure CO2. 20 million tons of pure CO2, we have it every year. And some of it, we put it in beer and sparkling water, but the rest, we leave it go because we have no place and we have no support. EU was saying we have to be only green and not blue. This is a very, very low-hanging fruit, very easy to do if the setup is there for CCS. So let's open the way. At the end, we're talking about climate, and maybe I'm a bit on my nerves because it's too hot here, and I don't like it. But we have to be relaxed with the rules to have things going.
Yeah, but Adolfo and Antoine, maybe I have a question for you. I mean, you're sweating here with me in this stuff. So I think the urgency of what we're doing should be fine. I'm hearing from you, too expensive, we can't do anything. Now, I think altogether, I think the message should be clear. I mean, so if it's just too expensive, then basically that's the conclusion is our industry says it's too expensive, we need to sweat a little more. But I think, and this is maybe where we need to get you into the boat, I think if you're just focusing on it's too expensive, and actually we did this in the energy industry also 10 or 20 years ago, we also said way too expensive, coal awesome, but then in the end we were forced to do it. But my question to you is, if it's only the price and the reality is it is going to be very expensive, what is your solution then?
Yeah, well, let me take it because I don't like your conclusion. We have to sweat a bit more. This cannot be a solution. So we have to come up with solutions. It is indeed too expensive, but what I said, it's too expensive for our customer, the farmer. He cannot afford it, and he will never be able to afford it. We have to change the rules of the games. And thanks God, there are people that are smarter than me that have looked at this topic. And by the way, it's a Dutch initiative, Sonia. I guess you've heard about it. It's Energy Netherlands together with Deloitte. They're looking about how to shape the market because it's too expensive for the farmer. But then if you look at the end of the chain, near to the consumer, it's a few percentages, 1, 2, 3%, on your piece of bread, and that is affordable. So we have to design markets, but the whole supply chain, to make possible this to happen, even if it is expensive. This being said, when we have a solution with blue, why that is maybe 50% for ammonia, for the fertilizer more expensive, why should I go for the 400%? We have also to keep a balance between the goal to decarbonize and economic realism. If we are too dogmatic, then we will hit a wall altogether, and then it becomes too hot and we have to sweat.
So we have to bring the the very end, the entire, you also talked about the value chain, the very end consumer in as well. Yeah,
I would say very similar answer in the sense that it risks being much more expensive than what our third countries' competitors can offer. So it needs an overall systematic approach by the EU. By no coincidence, I was speaking about trade policy before. So at the end of the day, the key question we need to ask policymakers is, are you fully satisfied if in 2050 Europe is climate neutral, but all the green steel, all the green ammonia and fertilizers are imported by third countries? I don't think this would be, a satisfactory endpoint for policymakers, for consumers, for my kids that will have to look for a job and so on. So we need to make sure that during the transition, these value chains, which actually we have inherited from my parents and my grandparents. I mean, we were lucky to be born in the EU, where we had all these industrial assets, which have been there for decades. And actually, we have inherited. We were, as I said, we were probably simply lucky. But now we need to make sure that they have a new life in the new world after, through the decarbonization transition.
Yeah. Are there any comments or questions from the rest of you in the room on, I guess, what you're hearing up here, or any ideas, any experiences of your own, whether you agree, disagree, or any questions on the specifics of what could unlock demand? I don't think I see.
Sorry, the back.
Yeah.
Too hot.
Way
Yeah.
high.
Here we've got a question or comment near the front.
Right at the back. Hello.
Sorry.
That's
yeah,
okay.
you're in the shadow for me.
Yeah,
At the back, and then we'll come towards the front. Go ahead and just tell us briefly who you are.
Yeah, in the shadow, but not in the shade, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately.
I'm Nick Crow. I'm Development Director at Eurogas Renewable Energy. We're the largest biomethane producer in the UK. I really found Antoine's reflections there quite interesting, and particularly the point about expense. That kind of view of this is less expensive, this is more expensive than the alternative, assumes a very, very flatline view of what fuel prices look like for the next 10 to 15 years. You know, I think a question for the entire panel, who are all, you know, kind of obviously experts in their field, do you genuinely think that for the next 10 to 15 years gas will stay around 35 euros a megawatt hour, or is there so much uncertainty in the world right now that we may see it spike again, at which point actually the alternatives do become less expensive? It doesn't solve the competitiveness angle, but at least you're insulated from an energy security perspective. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's take the other question.
Doesn't work. No, it does. I'm Megan Richards. I wanted to ask virtually the same question, so about costs and demand and how to increase demand with prices and how you see the global energy market changing and what impact this is going to have on European prices.
Well, I will not risk myself saying anything about evolution of gas prices, especially in this room. But do you expect really that gas prices will, it's a question, will go up significantly in Russia, in Egypt, in the US also? And do you expect electricity prices to go down? We've had the promise of electricity prices going down since a while, and nothing is coming. Actually, there is a risk because other consumers are coming. Data centers, at the end, it's a competition. What we need, at the end, it's energy.
Yeah, the question of beyond what the actual gas price is, I guess the security element built into that and the volatility that ultimately also manifests as in price. I mean, beyond what the price is, I guess the uncertainty in global energy markets, how do you factor that? Do you factor that into your analysis? It's maybe the question.
I can jump into that in the sense that if we have such a volatile gas market, with our electricity market design we have today, we would need to expect also electricity being extremely volatile. And these are, some of the key reasons why, in the last couple of weeks there have been quite important announcements by largest steel makers in Europe about delaying their projects. You can Google that very easily. And the first element they are mentioning is energy prices in the EU. So the key issue is if making low carbon energy sources competitive if the solution to make them competitive is just increasing the cost of fossil equivalent in Europe, this paradigm does not work in industries exposed to global competition, because there will be somebody somewhere else in the world being able to produce it and to deliver at cheaper prices. So we need, as I said before, some bridge solutions. I'm not saying that our supplier need to go bankrupt. We together need to be competitive in Europe until the final customer. Because, as I said, if the solution is just to make the traditional production route more expensive and push it out from the roof, actually the same companies are those that will have to deliver green steel in the future.
I mean, just really quick. I think the question about uncertainty. I think even when you ask Roland in the break, he's just going to give you his opinion. And I think the answer that what we have, and also for our customers, is we try to build resilient portfolios that can actually react to whatever change is going to happen. I think only a few weeks ago we started thinking about maybe Iran is going to re-enter the gas exporting market, something sort of unthought of maybe just 6 months ago. It's a very complicated world, and I think the security of supply question, which has sort of come up on agendas in the last years, has of course brought this all back up. So the answer is resilience, and I think also that is something that molecules can do really well. I mean, we're not going to take the electricity's world, the batteries away. Batteries are great. They store energy for an hour and a half. I like that. I love batteries. But what we're really looking for is being able to store energy for a month and a half or maybe 2 months. I think that is something that we also should put in here, especially when you look into this. I mean, right now, there's secure supply in electricity and gas. Of course, this is all factored in the energy price, and the climate stuff is something out there. I think the great thing about renewable gases, and whatever it is, and we need all the molecules, is that they are giving you energy. They're also giving you the climate component, the sustainable solution, but also actually there's a security of supply aspect in there. And I think always when we look back into the crisis, I think the big surge for our discussions on hydrogen were actually that, wow, we can maybe use excess electricity at home in Europe in our own autonomous market and create our own energy source at home. And I think this is something from an energy world makes total sense. And even with all the efficiencies, and you can discuss it today all day with me, the efficiencies, but in the end it makes sense. But for that, of course, we need to actually change some of the frameworks, the definitions, and especially how we're actually getting that cheap and green energy into molecules.
Okay, thank you. Are there other, yeah, here at the front.
Yes, hello to everybody. Bengt Bergt, Gas- und Wasserstoffwirtschaft, so German renewable, the German Gas and Hydrogen Association. I do have a comment and a question. One comment on the import of goods that might come in cheaper because they have different frameworks. We do have some protection frameworks in the European Union. They are not good. They have to be improved still, like CBAM, for example, and others, import regulations. But we are still staying with the fact that the market here gets more expensive. And what we saw in the past was even if Henry Hub gets cheap, that doesn't mean that we get the cheap gas here, although the transport costs were cheap too. So in the end, also the willingness to pay in Europe creates higher prices. So that's simple margin making. But in the end, we're initially talking about how to create a market for green gases, for biomethane and stuff. So I would like to place the question here, what do you think of quota regulations, for example, to give a demand into the system, into the grid? So do you have any experience or do you have any thought on that?
Okay, are there any other questions at this point? Otherwise, we'll go with that one. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, my first reaction would be, I mean, we are rather allergic to further constraints and obligations on ourselves because, as I said, we are already under the stick of the EU ETS with a very high carbon price. So the risk we see is that just by putting further targets on the consumers, being industrial consumers that are exposed to international competition, is just giving an additional competitive advantage to our competitors rather than creating stable demand. Our solution, as I said, is to have a combination of elements which are bringing the incentive down to the customer. So if you have any policy, any subsidy in the EU, by the way, for whatever product that you are subsidizing, whether a car, a heat pump, an electrolyzer, whatever, you will always have steel there, I bet. And make sure that that product is made with European steel. If that product is made with European steel and there is demand for steel, then indeed you can go back to our companies and ask for more decarbonization investments. So I think the answer is to, as you can see, is not to choose and go for what appears as the most evident and the simplest solution. Euroelectric, if you go to the power sector, we have an electrification target. But what we are telling them, look at the demand for electricity in the industrial sectors in the last couple of years. It has dropped by something like 20%. So if you are putting just a target without looking the surrounding conditions, we risk having bad surprises on the ground. So, as I said, I'm not saying no per se, but rather a no in isolation.
Yeah, you've mentioned CBAM. I want to emphasize CBAM is not a solution at all. CBAM will probably increase in the, well, not very short term, but mid-term will increase prices, but it's not enough to make this transition. We're talking about a huge industrial revolution that we're asked to do, and in 15 years, it's practically impossible. CBAM is an element. It's very welcome. We love CBAM, but it's not enough. It will not solve the problem itself. I think this idea of putting any targets at the end, close to the consumer, that is probably the only way to go. Because, I mean, there is no miracle. Economically, someone will have to pay. And probably the most effective way to do it is do it at the end, and make sure that there is no circumvention possible, product coming from outside, because that is the real risk. Imports coming with gray products or even green products, but a much lower price coming from outside and killing our supply chains here in Europe, our heritage, industrial heritage, as you say.
Okay. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'm gonna.
So I'm thinking about our customers who are sort of following the discussion and sort of like coming back, calling sort of our sales guys on next week Tuesday and going like, I've been here, sort of like, wow, there's still all of this mess. I mean, how are we going to go forward on this? So, I mean, number one, what could we tell them? First of all, we could deliver them biomethane biogas. That is what is, of course, happening. It's great. It gets them out of the German ETS, and they save a bit of money on the ETS payment. That is so far actually pretty much it. So the thing is, of course, let's talk about the big industrial consumers who have a bit of a horizon, of course, even though they're short-term buyers and they want to give us all the, like, let us manage the risk. They're saying, okay, so by when could you deliver the hydrogen? And I remember one of the big refineries who said, like, yeah, I understand, Marcel, but is it green? And then and I still have to smile about this question because I say, yes, of course. I mean, what our projects are doing is renewable electricity transformed by electrolysis into green hydrogen. But then again, yeah, but can you already prove it that it's green? And there again, you're at the stage like, oh my God, he's right. It's actually, at some stages, it's actually, especially on an industrial scale, it is actually quite challenging. Now, the third part, and that is actually, it sounds like a great offer, but on the other hand, it's also sort of quite a complicated issue. COP30 is almost there, and the European Union has a great offer, carbon credits. We're going to pay sort of carbon initiative or climate initiatives in the global south, and we get carbon credits for this, which we can use to make ourselves green. Actually, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be government, it's going to be companies. A global carbon credit market would be a great idea. Is it okay? Because I could use the carbon credit and go to my customer, I can actually make you negative. I could make all of you negative with these carbon credits. But of course, in the end, you find out again that really in the end, the energy is actually produced here in Europe, and there is a physical component to that. And I think that is something that we need to keep in mind when we're looking into the current stage. And that is why it's so important that we're going to expand what it is. That is why it's so important that we actually have acceptance for CCS now, because also we need all the solutions. And I think also there, we're going to, in order to reach the targets, need to actually all the options available.
Okay.
If I may, maybe it's a question to you, because I personally believe that in EU we need a mix of all technologies, certainly. As I say, I love hydrogen and I want rainbow hydrogen. All colors are good. But part of that mix, certainly gas and CCS is part of it. The problem we have is CCS is not there yet. Hopefully it will come. What about gas and cheap gas? why are we as Europe not looking into exploration of new gas fields? Because the best thing is to be served by yourself.
I'm going to assume that's a rhetorical question. Adolf?
No. I'm not going to answer a rhetoric question. I'm only, double down on the issue of, no silver bullet approach. If you see decarbonizing steel, it's around 150 million tons of CO2. It's clear that we will need hydrogen, we will need electrification, we will need CCS, CCU, and each time that you go for a silver bullet approach, what you are doing is simply increasing the overall cost and increasing the overall risk. So what we are saying is that try to keep these technological solutions open, which Europe, to be really honest with you, has not done. If you look at CCU projects in our sectors, most of them have been put on hold by the rules, and others have been put on hold by the regulatory uncertainty. Each time that you see a review, basically the investment needs to wait for that review before knowing what's going to happen afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up in a moment to give everyone a chance to get coffee or water, or both, as you wish. But if I could ask each of you still to reflect, I guess to pull out something positive over the past year, so something where you can point to, and beyond the change in narrative, but something more tangible that I guess you would look to as a sign, a sign of hope, of optimism that there is substantive change afoot. And second, these more substantial changes that you're looking for, what one example would be, it can either be for biomethane or hydrogen or both, but so something positive over the past year, and then something that you're still looking for that if we meet here a year from now, you would hope you would be able to present as something, that has moved things forward. Antoine?
If you want me to say something positive, maybe I looked a bit too negative, but I have to look in the longer term. For me, as fertilizer industry, and in the longer term, in Europe, we're 450 million Europeans. We will always need food, and this is security of supply. Do we want to depend for our food on Mr. Putin? Do we want to depend on Mr. Trump either? If the answer is no, that means this industry has a future. And as we will stay, I think we will always be in Europe. That means we will be always partly good customers of you and partly good customers of those who bring cheap electrons.
Well, for us as Eurofer, it's very clear. We had 2 strategic dialogues with Commission President von der Leyen in the first 6 months of the year. 1 plenary debate on steel in Parliament, couple of council meetings discussing steel. So it's fully recognized that they want steel to be made in Europe, which is good news for you because this is gas and molecules demand. We simply need to translate all this huge political capital into concrete measures and make sure that the concrete measures are matching the big political ambitions behind them. And for that, the cross-sectorial cooperation like this one is essential because ultimately they need to realize that each time that you are preserving steel in Europe, you are preserving gas supplier, ceramic supplier, cement cooperation. So it's the whole value chain that is being preserved in Europe.
Yeah.
I think it's a cool job that we have. First of all, it's a bit existentialist. I mean, if we don't get this right, then one day the fossil fuels will end and our companies will not exist anymore. Also, of course, we do something that is, of course, in the long term, really sort of in the long term. And I think that's really the best thing about it. All our companies, all you are here, none of you are taking the negative sentiment out in the street and are saying like, I don't care about transition anymore. Of course you care about this transition. Even in the US, the sort of strongest supporters of the new administration, they're buying low-emission LNG carriers. So, I mean, it's in there, it's in our DNA and it will continue. And I think in the end, and this is also something, the energy industry is extremely complicated. That's why, of course, with all of the sort of new people who are discussing with us, it seems there's so many problems to solve. But in the end, we have actually managed all of that. We have integrated all of the renewables, ETS systems. We have actually harmonized the network codes for electricity, something unthinkable. And therefore, I think it's pretty good. The hydrogen network will be there. The storage facility is there. Efficient infrastructure is available. We can use that for all of the gases. And I think that makes me really confident that, of course, right now, with all the new government strategies still outstanding, we need maybe some more commitment from regulators. But the best thing is, when I said it, I hope you listened clearly, some of the projects which are sort of, they are put on hold. They are not cancelled. So basically, we can get back on track and also reach the targets, I hope.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That was a good reminder of the nuance of what you said. Thank you very much. So thank you to our panel, first panel. Round of applause. Thank you. And that takes us to a coffee break. So it's 4 o'clock. So if you could be back here at 4:15, we'll start. We're going to carry on, though. And I guess we'll propose to close the doors in a moment, assuming the ventilators here, those air conditioners, which have a very appealing 18 degrees written on them, are trying to do their job. No sign of that thunderstorm yet, which I guess is good news. So far, all systems go for the barbecue. So what we wanted to do in this second panel was, I guess, move a little bit from demand to focus more on supply, and also to focus on biomethane a bit more than hydrogen in particular. And we wanted to look at the market challenges that are currently presenting or manifesting as barriers to the deployment of more biomethane in Europe, and how we might overcome these. For that, I'm going to invite up the panel to come and join me up here right away. So that's Karina Grajecki, Andy Brosnan, Isaac Cito, and David Rubini. If you'd all like to make your way up here, then I'll give you a proper introduction and we can kick off. Nice to meet you. Hi. Hello again. David. How? Davide. Okay. Right, take a seat. So brief intro to everyone. So Isaac Cito sat on the end, a business development strategist at ACT or ACT Commodities. Someone who specializes in international energy markets, market analysis, their growth, and so on. And at ACT, he's led several initiatives relating to European biomethane in particular, compliance markets for that. So that includes, for example, road transport targets, gas supplier obligations, and industrial applications. So someone who can bring us, I guess, a markets perspective on where are we at with biomethane and what are the market barriers holding up its further deployment. Next to him, we have Davide. Okay, I'm not pronouncing it properly. David.
I'll tell you a trick later. But
okay. David Rubini, based in the UK, is head of regulatory affairs for gas power and environmental products for EMEA at Vitol. Previously worked in business development and regulation for gas and power at both Shell and Equinor. Co-chairs the Central and Eastern European Gas Task Force and Methane Emissions Working Group for Energy Traders Europe. Next to him in the middle, we have Karina Grajecki, Director for European Affairs at ENGIE, has been in Brussels since the mid-2000s. Previously worked at the Association of German Chambers of Commerce and Industry as a policy advisor, joined RWE, headed up their Brussels office a while later, and as you heard today, is heading up NG's Government Affairs Department here in Brussels. And finally, Andy Brosnan, President for Low Carbon Fuels at A New Climate, previously Element Markets, which it was called when he started there, led business development there, and then headed over to Vancouver to lead their Canadian low carbon fuels team. So we have an array of expertise, not all of them the faces that you would see at a Brussels conference every week. So I'd encourage you to put your questions to them and make the most of their expertise. As for the previous panel, however, we wanted to make sure you're all awake and with us and put a question to you first before we come to the panel. So if we could get our question up on the screen, then we'll... So in this case, it's an either-or question. I'm hoping it's not going to be tempting for everyone to say both. So which for you is the better approach, or perhaps which for you is the greater priority when it comes to biomethane deployment? Is it creating more of the carrot, an enabling framework, or is it we need more of a stick right now, which means in this case we need binding biomethane targets, and if they don't get met, well, you pay for them, you pay for that. And I think what we'll do here is, rather than a show of hands, maybe, well, we can have a show of hands first, but then I'd, welcome anyone to explain, I guess, how they feel the way they do about this. Maybe the first one, a show of hands. Is it more about creating a carrot right now? Who would say that? Okay, I'd say maybe a third, half the room. And the stick? Which of you think we need more of a stick right now? Okay. One or two. Okay, so definitely more carrots than sticks? Both, yeah, both. Yeah, both. That's obviously, yeah. Also an option. Is there anyone who'd like to just give us a line or two on why you think more carrot or more stick? I'm tempted to call on the back in green, since you stood out as the one saying we need more stick. There weren't so many out there. Would you mind? Can we get a... Oh, not yet. We will in a moment.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Eunice from STX Group. So I chose the second option, more of the stick. The reason for that is that we need the biomethane market to be taken seriously by regulation. We need definitely more of the first one, more regulatory framework that will allow biomethane to be properly recognized in cross-border trading, for example. And for these, we need we have already many legislations in place whose operationalization many times is difficult to be achieved. And when you have binding targets is when regulators, the whole stakeholder engagement becomes more serious. So in simple terms, and in short, not take the time of the panel that we all want to hear, this is how I would put it very quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to volunteer? Yeah, we have the gentleman here and then the lady across the way. So we're making way towards you.
I think your questions are somewhat conflicted and confusing, because I would be in favor of both, but I think there should be a binding obligation with a regulatory framework for greenhouse gas reduction. And to the extent that biomethane is the best solution, it should have a business case, and there should be penalties for non-compliance.
A binding obligation, so beyond the regulatory framework for greenhouse gas reduction, or you're saying that so is it enough to have a binding framework for greenhouse gas reduction. Yeah, and that in itself should be enough to then create the business case for biomethane. We shouldn't need any additional binding targets for biomethane. Okay. There's a lady here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Simona from NSOG. Actually, I had a simpler reasoning that gave me the opposite answer to the previous two. I would have thought binding targets can oblige the construction of projects that are simply built not to pay the penalty and maybe not operated later on. So I thought maybe let's put some seeds for carrots and not oblige in this stage.
Okay, so no obligations at the moment. Yeah, but sorry, can we have the microphone just back?
Well, that's if you have to choose, because in the real world we have a mix of both. But
both,
just making this exercise of choosing, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I haven't seen any other hands immediately. We'll give you another opportunity to come back in a moment. But panelists, what's your take on this? Andy, if you want to.
Yeah, thank you. Again, Andy Brosnan, and I'm with the New Climate, and we are new to Eurogas and really new to the European biomethane community, so thank you for the invitation. So I think it's both, and our interest in entering this market stemmed largely from the way in which RED is implemented. We like the idea of an overarching target at the Commission level and the ability of member states to look at their resource endowments, their economic drivers, their political climate, and develop a policy and a framework that would allow them to achieve those goals. So I think in the biomethane space, the same thing could be said. I get Pat's point that we want to keep it fuel agnostic and let the best fuel win, per se, but given Europe's dependence on gas, or maybe dependence might be an overstatement, but current usage of gas, it makes sense to have a target to decarbonize it. And I think making that 35 BCM not just a target, but a mandate at the EU level, and then allowing member states to determine which sectors they're going to potentially incentivize with carrots to bring that to fruition. And the advantage of biomethane is that it can be used in all sectors: transport, built environment, industrials, power. And so by powering down to the member states, they can kind of, again, look at those factors and figure out what's best for them, and use a combination of carrots and sticks even at the member state level. Okay,
so yes to a binding target for biomethane, like this 35 BCM for 2030, and then the carrots, but leaving it then open where that comes from, who delivers it, how it's delivered, how it's deployed, using the carrots in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, and thank you for this great start of the panel with not asking us as the panelists, but the audience. Really great approach. Sorry for being boring now, but I fully agree to Andy and also say both for Angie, which is maybe not our natural first reflex. We would normally go for enabling regulatory frameworks rather than for forcing things. But in this case, and in the case of biomethane, we really see that this is so much untapped potential in Europe that we really need to push this a bit more. And we see in the example of at national level in France, for example, where there is a supplier obligation, that this works. And we also observe that in other member states, there are at least reflections on having quotas or elements like this. So we think in addition to a European-wide, maybe non-binding target, but to have more that type of supplier obligations is a way forward, together with enabling factors. And I would also add to the carrot story funding. because I think in general, and maybe a very, very general observation on biomethane is that it's overlooked. It's so much overlooked. If you look at what we have on the European agenda, we have action plans and strategies for almost everything, but I'm not aware of any action plan or broad strategy for biomethane. It's sometimes part of things, and it's great that it's part of Repower EU, also now in the current discussion of Repower EU. But it deserves more visibility because it really is a business case, and I found very interesting to hear earlier today from the audience also, great audience today, that there is demand for biomethane, and we see that demand also as ENGIE, and we work with biomethane purchase agreements, so the concept of long-term agreements that we know from power purchase agreements. There is demand, especially from the chemical sector, obviously. So we have big BPAs with BASF, for example, and Arkema for long-term, 7 years, 10 years, things like this. So the demand is there, but it's not enough. And that's why we think a mix of carrots and stick is probably the best for now to kick it off.
Okay, thank you. Yes, indeed, not common to hear companies are arguing in favor of a binding target. So, yeah, it's noted. Go ahead.
Line here.
As you wish.
So, just for the sake of being a little bit controversial, the definition of RED in Article 2 calls support schemes both targets and direct subsidies. It doesn't call targets bidding tools. So they're both supportive. And we need to appreciate that. Otherwise, we inevitably fall in a trap of a negative connotation, something that actually is good, could be good for the industry and also for consumers if a number of conditions are respected. So the way I tackle the questions is that I try to make the effort, and I'm inviting my colleagues to do this more and more. Let's stop a second. The regulatory environment for biomethane so far is very piecemeal. There's been an organic growth going in many directions, trying to fix problems as they were coming about. But there hasn't been a moment to think about a target model. So if we accept the challenge, and I know that the Commission is accepting the challenge. I'm glad that Mikola is in the room. Sorry for singling him out, but I'm very happy that he's here to listen to what we're saying. If I did this exercise, I would say, okay, what's the most efficient way to deliver, which means cheaper, to deliver biomethane to consumers? And that is to try to, first of all, create as much competition as possible. We lived on the results and the benefits of the internal market. So if we create a system of harmonized quotas for suppliers defined in terms of GHG reduction so that they are climate technology neutral, so that whenever there is a better technology can come in, and we make sure that those quota can be fulfilled by bringing biomethane from anywhere in Europe, we will achieve that. Then, once you have done that, once you have created visibility in the long term for demand, putting all the players on a level playing field, then you can start looking at the exception, and you start seeing, okay, what are the regions, the type of biomethane production that may need subsidies? That is an efficient way to use public money, but then when you do that, you have to be careful that granting subsidies doesn't become a barrier to cross-border trade, doesn't become a regulatory risk, doesn't create legal uncertainty. And also, you have to make sure that once the subsidies come in, they do not alter the merit order. Yeah. Because if we start having the most successful molecule being the most subsidized molecule, well, then we have a problem, especially in times of budget constraints as we live in today. So that's why when challenged with picking one of the two, I start from the quota.
Okay. So yes to a quota. Definitely. Yes.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me today. I think this is somewhat of a tricky issue. I think it's maybe somewhere in between recognizing that, and Davide mentioned it, we need to level out the playing field. Well, right now I think it is a little bit of an uneven playing field because there's biomethane markets that are far more mature than others. And some member states have definitely benefited from pre-existing or current feed-in tariffs today so that their biomethane sector can grow to where it is today. So when I think about this, I actually think about maybe somewhere in the middle, but heading towards demand targets. I think it's probably maybe prudent for maybe a phased approach where you phase in demand schemes and phase out production subsidies so that you can give an opportunity for emerging biomethane developing countries to kind of catch up and to kind of lay the groundwork of sites and grid access and so on and so forth so that we can have a strong European biomethane sector. I think with that in mind, once we get to that mature phase, we start implementing, yes, more demand incentives, more binding targets. But I think the key here, in my mind, is that every European or EU producer should be able to compete for the same markets, and we should have mutual market access. So not only does a EU producer know that he can deliver his biomethane to another country's demand incentive, but vice versa, an obligated party in, for example, France knows that he can procure beyond the limits of their border.
Yeah, okay, thank you. One follow-up question for anyone who knows to answer. How close are we to potentially getting a binding target for biomethane? Because you've all said it makes sense. I guess at least some of you are in regular contact with policymakers. Is there any appetite for that at the political level? Or is this, we're saying this is great, but realistically we should spend our panel talking about other measures because it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. Does anyone have a sense of whether this is within the realm of possibility?
Since I have the mic in my hand, I can start.
Go ahead.
Again, as Davide mentioned, there's been patchworks of examples of this. I think we've seen a number of proposals for biomethane blending targets or demand obligations by gas suppliers. I would hope that this would also feed into the ETS2 as well, but we're seeing it, proposed in the Netherlands, in France. It's supposed to start next year. I was just at a conference last week in Ireland where they're talking about the renewable heat obligation. But in my mind, the hold-up to this problem is it's a catch-22 in the sense that they want to have a blending target, but also want to promote native production. And so that's where I think my issue is it doesn't really open up the cross-border trade and the market access for mutual market access, but it definitely is being attempted, but in silos.
So those targets are usually specifically for domestic production, so they don't help create this single market indeed that you said ideally you'd see, but they're stimulating production, but not helping create that overall market as such.
As proposed right now, they're stimulating domestic production.
Yeah, okay. Karina.
Yes, indeed. That is also what I said earlier. We observe encouraging developments, but at national level. Yeah. Now, this can be good and bad at the same time. Of course, we also would favor a fully European approach with a level playing field across borders. But maybe we can consider, okay, let's then start bottom up in this case, and let's welcome national initiatives. Again, encouraging that in Germany the debate has started, because that was for a long time a sort of a no-go as part of the energy transition story. But at the European level, and I hope I'm wrong actually, but my personal impression from discussions here in Brussels is that there is not a huge appetite of doing whatsoever in the near future. And that is really a pity, because I think the potential is there. And I also understand that the European Commission would want actually also more engagement from the member states, but they see that the national situations and schemes are very different, so they're sort of reluctant to do more at European level. And what we are now looking at, again, more on the funding side, is, for example, to bring biomethane everywhere in where it could, and where it not only could, it will for sure make sense. For example, the decarbonization bank. If you look at the potential biomethane has for decarbonizing industry very quickly without big technical changes. But that would mean that it's also not about so much about CAPEX support, which is the usual way of doing things at European level, but also OPEX.
Yeah.
And that is something that we try to bring forward, because that would be an element that could really help industry to decarbonize thanks to biomethane and quickly, and that would really fit in the overall narrative of the Clean Industrial Deal, where we observe, and I just want to echo what I heard earlier today several times in the conference, that unfortunately the regulatory framework for renewable gases and low carbon gases in general is not really in line with the overall aim of enhancing industrial competitiveness and reconciling this effort with decarbonization. Because when we look, and it has been said earlier already by Christian at the beginning, when we look at, let me call it on purpose, nitty-gritty regulation in delegated acts and annexes of technical documents, we see actually only hurdles. We see way too heavy requirements for renewable hydrogen. We already spoke about the Low Carbon Hydrogen Delegated Act. And now, most recently, and I hope this will not be confirmed, but it's to be seen, we understand that there are discussions about making the case for bio-LNG much more difficult, with not recognizing the equivalence approach for the liquefaction. So that would be another element where it's really in the technical details, but it would be another element that would really hindering demand rather than making the case for kicking off biomethane, including bio-LNG.
Yeah. Okay. You want to come back? Go ahead.
Well, just on your question, you asked whether it's we're wasting time by talking about blending quota or not. I think no, not at all. The time for European legislation to come out in a proper way with the right impact assessment, etc., it's 3-4 years. RED III is just in the process of implementation. I just don't see why the Commission shouldn't at least consider thinking about maybe moving, at least for some part of the directive, to a regulation level, and maybe in that context not define very stringent and firm targets, but at least define the criteria for introducing blending quota. So if you member states do that, please make sure that there is no cross-border trade. Please make sure that they are technology neutral. This is a conversation that I think the Commission is very much willing to entertain. Second reason why it is timely and we shouldn't overlook the topic is that, as Isaac was saying, there are national conversations, and those national conversations are just what the name says. They are national. And they are blind to the biggest constituency that we all have, which is the consumers. It's very strange to listen to a government that is preoccupied about energy affordability and then say only national production can come to my consumers. It's nonsense. As much as it's nonsense to say, to think that the national producer is better off by relying on a small, possibly open to a legal regulatory risk because government change, demand pool rather than a European pool defined according to European rules. It's not to the advantage. It may look advantageous for national producers in the short term. It is definitely not in the long term. You want a regulatory framework that is at a European level, that is stable, that is visible, and everybody aligns to. So yes, we need to talk about it, and we need to talk about it now.
Andy.
Yes, I live in Vancouver, so I won't pretend to have an inside track personally at the Commission, but we did meet with Kitty at the Commission this morning, and while she didn't specifically mention mandates, she did present a very optimistic picture for biomethane moving forward and was very interested in hearing about what we perceived as the obstacles. So, again, not going as far as saying a mandate, but optimistic that it will play a role moving forward.
Okay. That brings me to, I guess, the other big question. I'd welcome any views from those of you in the room here as well. What do we think is the biggest, so aside from the issue of target or no binding target or no binding target, what is the biggest obstacle, as you put it, the biggest market barrier to deploying biomethane in Europe at much larger scale to fulfill some of these sometimes quite obvious sounding applications? Do you want to?
Yeah, so it's hard to choose one, but if I were to do that, I would choose, I guess, somewhat of a vague word, and that's uncertainty, right? It's uncertainty as to when and what the substance of the member state transpositions will be. It's uncertainty around the UDB and when and how it'll be implemented, not just between member states, but those connected to the grid and those across the Atlantic. I think it's uncertainty around permitting and how quickly that can happen, and uncertainty around what to do with subsidies and how they impact cross-border trade and how to deal with them and how to deal with the emission reductions associated with them. So I think the market is kind of waiting for those answers. And obviously, if you're going to make long-term commitments to invest in a project, you need to see some sort of long-term demand signal. And that demand signal won't come until some of this uncertainty can be cleared up.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, we can pause for a moment and go to the room. Is there anyone, because we're going to come back to the panel in a sec, who wants to highlight, Antoine, a market barrier that's particularly close to your heart?
Thank you. Antoine from fertilizer industry. Of course, the idea of using biomethane for decarbonizing is great, and you mentioned the advantage of not changing technology. And I'm sorry I didn't do my homework properly, but my question is, what about the price? At what price it comes? Because as fertilizer industry, we practically can pass on zero premium to our customers. So if the net result is increasing the cost of the energy mix, of the gas mix that we are getting, it pushes us out of the business. It is the same thing as with the RFNBO target. They put a target on RFNBO, it's on our shoulders. Basically, the target's 42% RFNBO, it's a joke. If we do 4%, I would be very happy in 2030, honestly. So putting either a target that is unachievable or a target that kills your customer, I don't think it's very wise. So we have to have this element and affordability in mind. So if there is a target, it has really to go at the end of the demand.
Yeah, so maybe a question over who that target would be imposed upon, and then indeed a question over price. Is there anyone? Yes, Oliver. If we could get a microphone. Okay, yeah, gentleman there, and then we'll go to the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe to answer that question, yes, there is a group in which you can pass on the cost, which are the households, right? So Antoine from the fertilizers is totally correct. If we pass it on to industry, they have no opportunity, but the households can. I'm from Energy Netherlands, by the way. I'm at Muilwijk. And that is a big group. So I totally agree with the panel that we should really move forwards on that. And yes, we have to get out of the way the point, where should the biomethane then come from? And in the Netherlands, we're dealing with that right now, waiting for the Commission also to make a statement on that. But I guess that households are big everywhere in Europe, so that should be the target group to put the blending obligation to. And we, as energy suppliers, we can simply calculate the cost extra to our end customer. So it's a brilliant mandate, I would state.
Okay, we'll go to the middle here, and then forward to Megan. No, just to the back. Yeah, and then to Megan.
Hi, thank you. Well, basically, Andy, you mentioned about the use of biomethane, what we can do with it. Karina, you said it's overlooked, we should do more or bring it to where it should be in Europe. Davide, you mentioned we need targets, we need some binding targets. And Isaac, you said about, let's say, levelized playing field and cross-border market issue, potential issues. But what I like here, and maybe we should have Antoine on the panel, is that the value chain of biogas is much more complex than that. We talk about residue, we talk about waste that could be used as fertilizer. I came across the Biogas Europe report, 2023, 2024, when they say, yeah, they are asking for a target, but they also say that the consequences in terms of production, the output that could be used as fertilizers, could reduce the need for fertilizer from natural gas. And the overall welfare should be looked at. So maybe, Davide, we need to have a beer with Mikola here in the room and discuss that as well. Because it looks like we look in silos. We talk about the molecules, how to price it and how to bring it to the market, while the value chain is much more complex and could bring something else. And maybe something more than hydrogen. Thank you.
Antoine is up for a beer. Those of you didn't catch that.
There's a lot of stuff.
Okay, hold on one second. We're just going to go to Megan still, and then we'll come back to the... Yeah, we'll come back to...
Yes, thanks. This is perhaps a silly question, but you can always have a silly question. I want to ask you, because it's about scale up, how you see the potential of small scale or community-based biomethane production and use, because this exists in the electricity sector. We have rooftop solar panels. What's the potential here for really rapidly increasing the amount of production domestically or in communities or in distributed areas?
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll come back to the panel. Yeah. David, do you want to...
I'll start from the last question because it's a difficult one. Biomethane is a bit more expensive than natural gas. But I haven't said biomethane quota. I haven't, right? I've said emission reduction targets. And that's what we have in red. Whether there is going to be at some point a better solution than biomethane is, we're not married to it. We are in the business of biomethane, but we can do other things as a trader. Now, I know I'm going to say something that is may sound a little bit naive to some ears, but unfortunately, in these days, we live in days where we try to do social policy via energy policy. And that's a big mistake. Now we're talking about lowering the price for energy for the industry in Germany. What is going to do that? The only thing that it's going to do is that it's bearish, it's bullish on the wholesale market. There will be more demand, price will go up, and then you will need more subsidies to cover that. If there is a problem of affordability, it should not be dealt with energy policy. It should be dealt with fiscal policy. And that's how you then try to find a way to help the industry if there is an issue there in terms of affordability. But if you try to engineer some way to deliver cheaper energy, then sooner or later you're going to stumble into some unintended consequence and distortion. So I take your point, but it should probably be framed a little bit different. I do want to answer to the question on cross-border, on the barriers at the moment. I think there is a long list of very small solutions that could unlock a big potential. And I'm going to give you 3 examples. Romania, gas quality specification, the strictest in the entire world for oxygen, for reasons that are completely unknown. And Romania, if you know a little bit about the economy of the country, I would say has a decent potential in terms of biomethane production. It's one technical details that needs changing. Mass balance liquefaction. I've heard absurd stories saying that if we allow mass balance liquefaction, we're going to lock in more grey LNG demand. That's not what mass balance says. Mass balance says that if I put more from this side, I cannot put more from this side. So as a matter of fact, the more biomethane I produce and inject on the grid, and surely if I go to my boss, Pablo, and say, hey, Pablo, I need a cargo of LNG because I need to mass balance a little bit of biomethane and I'm injecting in Romania, he says, go get a beer with your friends. That is something. And today we have had a vote in the Dutch parliament forbidding mass balance liquefaction in the domestic market. Insane. Accounting rules. I've had a long conversation with lots of people out there say, it's confusing, member states don't know how to account their GHG emission reduction. Then you start digging into regulation and you really go into the depth of it. And you find out that there is absolutely zero firm legal obstacles. The problem is in a little form that the Commission sends to member states to account for their emission reduction. Voila. So there is plenty of little things that you can do and they could really help unlocking the industry.
Okay, thank you also for the specific examples. Yeah, Isaac.
Yeah, I'll address the question of affordability and I think also small scale and take a bit of a more visionary approach and come back to the thing we discussed about a European pool of binding targets. I think if we have these binding targets and we have price signals around the EU to signal to producers of where to move the biomethane around the EU, then I think having that competition of EU producers hopefully will drive innovation and hopefully push costs down in the long run. To the question about small scale operations, I think it's the similar concept in the sense that I think the private investment is responding to these price signals in the demand market and seeing, okay, does small scale even make sense? Should we consolidate or should we just build a brownfield greenfield project? That would be kind of my long view on what could happen if we unlock the cross-border trade barriers so that we have a uniform market across Europe.
Okay, thank you. Andy or Karina?
Yeah, maybe just very quickly on the question of scale. I would say it's really very different in the different member states. In France, for example, it is quite small scale. I mean, not as small as rooftop PV maybe, but it's really very local, very rural, but with the big advantage to be immediately connected to the existing gas grid, one of the other advantages. I know that in Germany it's also quite local, but often without the connection to the gas grid. That makes it already more complicated. And in the UK, for example, I mean, I'm really speaking about our projects as ENGIE. And in the UK, we have very big scale biomethane plants. So it's really industrial scale. It's a totally different approach. But that is, again, maybe another advantage, that you can play on the different scales wherever the local situation fits best. And then overall, again, on the question of national approaches or European approaches, I think, again, in general, it should be at European scale. Everything we do should be at European scale. We have a climate neutrality target at European scale for 2050. We just today, and we all read it in the news, got a very ambitious 2040 target on the table. Could be a good topic for our next conference. A lot to say about that. So European scale is important. We just think that, especially in the case of biomethane, it can be a first step to rather, go on national quotas, targets, schemes that are designed in a way, and that is important, obviously, to be Europeanized afterwards. Really with the aim of allowing cross-border trade, etc. That is obviously the aim, and that should happen rather faster than slower. But that would mean that more member states engage in this process, and then there can be a sort of, if the European Commission doesn't take an initiative, it can be a sort of coalition of the willing member states that work together, that have comparable schemes, and that allow for cross-border participation. just as an idea. And Antoine, coming back to your members and the cost question, that's exactly why we are pushing for things like having biomethane OPEX aid in the decarbonization bank to really unlock this potential with a little, let's call it kick-off support at the beginning to make the business case and then to get the market running, and then, as we all know, price will go down, and then it will be a business case even without funding.
Okay. Did you want to come back? Go ahead.
Sure. I would just make a quick remark on the comment about being able to pass through costs to the consumer. And just an anecdotal observation looking at the difference between Canada and the US, where in Canada, the utilities have the ability to pass through their procurement costs of renewable natural gas to the downstream customer, at least a couple of them do. And in the US, you need to have a green gas program where people opt into it in order to pass through the cost. And the difference in the amount of uptake between the two countries, at least from a utility perspective, is pretty significant. The Canadian system does seem to generate much more demand, as you'd expect. Artificial, perhaps, because the customer doesn't have a choice, but it is working in terms of meeting their goals. Just a flip side to that, though, obviously, when you're doing that, you create a potential for an affordability issue. And in today's political climate, that has the potential to work against you. And as an example, in Canada, the Conservative Party had put on its agenda, the primary point, in fact, that they wanted to axe the tax and get rid of the clean fuel regulations. And they were the leading party, and because of that, in the months leading up to the election, essentially all buying of the associated quota stopped, right? And the market tanked. And more importantly, investment dried up because no one had that certainty they needed to make that long-term commitment. So it was truly on the ballot. So it have to be obviously very thoughtful in how we pass costs through and make sure that affordability is always part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to close this session in a moment. I wonder, does each of you have obviously not a solution to all of this, but a takeaway for us, perhaps one thing that you would like to see happen in the coming weeks, months, let's say a year, in time for next year's conference? I guess that could be a target, but it could be something else as well. What could make a difference on the ground to move beyond where we are now on biomethane? Yeah.
Judging by everyone fanning themselves right now, maybe a binding cooling target would be nice. No, I think I want to go back to one thing that Vida said on the mass balance issue. I think one thing that's quite confusing amongst EU member states is kind of the understanding or interpretation of how mass balance works, and that can hold up cross-border trade because, as you said, you put something in, you take something out. You can either count biomethane for its sustainable attributes when you put it in, or when you count when it comes out, and there's various ways of how that's been treated. And if you're counting everything that you're putting in, then you're not going to want to import any biomethane, and vice versa. If you're counting everything at consumption, then there's a disincentive to export your biomethane. Anyways, I think we need a clear alignment on how EU member states are going to view mass balance, and I think it should be at the point of consumption.
Should be at the point of consumption, yeah.
Very quickly, I think for next year, if we manage to clean the table from all these little bits that I've mentioned, and we have the implementing regulation enforced, and we have a clear understanding of mass balance across member states, I think things will be already quite different. I think next year we're going to be already in a different place because member states are introducing finally the implementation of RED III, and we see positive developments there. We see France going to a GG target for transport. We see Netherlands going to a GG targets for transport. We see Belgium, for some reason, deciding to become less competitive than Netherlands in the maritime sector and sticking to energy targets. but things are changing. So I think there is a movement there. But really, for next year, let's clean the table of all the little bits, and then in parallel start thinking a bit more visionary on the market target model for post 2030.
Okay, thank you, Karina.
I will say what I always say in this kind of discussion is I think we need much more pragmatism. And that would if we would really just adapt this simple attitude of being a bit more pragmatic on the bits and pieces that Davide just mentioned, we could get quite some way ahead in 1 year of time, because there are a lot of elements at national level, at European level, but it's a mess. Let's be honest, it's a mess right now, and it's really the certainty and the visibility of the way ahead that market players are also missing, obviously. Because we can do a lot. I already mentioned a lot of activities that we as a company do, and we have extremely ambitious targets for biomethane by 2030. Really very ambitious, but without the clarity we cannot get to it. So really a call for pragmatism, stopping the nitty-gritty detailed discussions on delegated acts and technicalities, get things going.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll echo that sentiment, and in particular as it relates to the UDB, trying to get some progress in that in the near term as it relates to gases and third-party contributors. And then, again, on pragmatism, just generally, I mean, we think about what's ahead for natural gas in terms of the demand side of the equation. You have data centers that have massive demand that will be coming online, and they have a willingness to pay for biomethane because they have emission reduction goals that they want to meet. But we run into these problems around certification and emission reduction claims and GHG protocol and all of those things that are really artificial. I mean, we need to solve them, but there's no reason that that should be what stops more biomethane from coming to market.
Okay, thank you. I think we managed to cover quite a lot of ground in those, 45, 50 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our panel. And thank you to you for your questions and contributions as well. Panel is free to move. You are not free to move. So stay in your seats just a moment longer. We've got another just 30 minutes before we pop out for some more air. We have a final, so yeah, you'll be pleased to hear, shortish session. And Andy, in a way, flagged it with his Canada-US example. We wanted to look a little bit broader than just Europe at what are other countries, other parts of the world doing to stimulate the renewable gases market, and in particular, where are they being successful, and are there examples that we could be bringing back with us here to Europe to make a difference? So for this, I'd like to welcome up Pat Foodie, Nick Crow, and Ana Alcalde, if you'd like to join us up here. So we've got three experts here. So Pat, on the end, Chief Development Officer at Iogen, am I pronouncing that correctly? Okay. A long-standing innovator in cellulosic biofuels and low-carbon gases. He wears lots of hats. He's a developer and investor in biofuel-related tech, an entrepreneur. Has been a pioneer in the use of renewable natural gas, biomethane, in refineries. Also knows a lot about fuel credit markets and has invented quite a lot of things with more than 50 patents to his name. So welcome, Pat. Nick, so in the middle, Development Director at Grisson Renewable Energy, and also co-chairs a new GB Great Britain Green Gas Task Force. Grisson produces biomethane from distillers' residues, is the biggest company in the world to do so. And so in his role there is looking to scale up biomethane's contribution within the UK energy system. And as I said, chairs this new Green Gas Task Force, which he also founded. And that's basically collaboration between biomethane producers and then also the British gas network. So looking at how they can work together for more deployment. Was previously a civil servant in the UK. And finally, Anna joins us from Paris, the International Energy Agency, where she's an analyst in its renewable energy division with biomethane, at least one of your, I don't know if it's your only area of expertise, but certainly one of them. And was previously had a long career at Repsol, where she worked as a research engineer in bioenergy and also in refining, so comes with a long industry experience as well. So we'll see if we may have time for some questions at the end, but in principle wanted to put a couple of questions to our three representatives. Asking them, well, to kick off, and they have had to think about this in advance, if you look, so looking beyond Europe's borders, if you could pick one example of a business case that has been built successfully for the renewable gas market, I guess this could be biomethane, but could extend that to hydrogen as well. What is it? I guess what's the one thing that you would highlight and you would ideally like to bring back to Europe and see rolled out here? And we can talk a little bit after about the obstacles or why it doesn't exist here already and so forth. But what's kind of a standout example for you of others doing things better than we're doing here so far? Who wants to kick off? You've got the microphone. Go ahead.
Thank you, everybody, for having me. There's a few examples I could choose, but if there was any one, it would be the way the California low-carbon fuels standards evolved. Back about 10 years ago, the refiners were all on stages like this saying, it's impossible, it's not going to work, we can't afford it, the program's going to crash, and the credit prices were very low, and there was an inconsistency. And I think that the producers were saying, well, if you make this happen, we'll all go out of business, so you won't make it happen. What the California government did was they implemented something they called a cost containment mechanism, where they maintained their high targets, but they created a relief valve mechanism where all the compliance that happened got divided among everybody. So the over-compliers were able to get money off the under-compliers, independent of what the level of compliance was. And by doing that, it created a price signal for the market. Everybody realized there was a buyout associated with that. It created a price signal for investors in the market. And what's happened is the market is so successful that there's a surplus of credits, and it's overinvested, and it far exceeded the targets that California had. And they've since put in a ratchet mechanism to amp up the deliverables. So if there's any one thing, I think it would be aggressive targets with well-structured relief valve that doesn't just put taxes on people. It's progressive in that it rewards the over-compliers.
Okay. Have we got anything remotely similar in Europe, in your understanding, either in existence or in the pipeline?
I think there's lots of programs that have penalties, but there's no leveling mechanism. I think that and there was in California too, a reluctance to give people a break. What they did in California, which is another layer on it, is they allowed people to bank their non-compliance and charge interest on it. So there was a way to come through it, but I think the big message is don't turn down your targets, create a way of managing your targets within the cost tolerance of whatever consumers feel is appropriate. And they had an index $220 a ton of carbon, and if it got too expensive, then people wouldn't do it. If it was within that, if it was in that window, it happened, and a lot of things happened in California as a result of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I would kind of echo Pat's point slightly, which is around kind of that idea of certainty. So I think the obligated parties in the States, or in California rather, were always certain that they were going to have to pay their dues, and therefore the scheme stood up on that basis. I think if you look at the way European policy is developed, actually there's quite a lot of quite easy buyouts in a lot of these schemes, so it shouldn't be about penalisation, but it should also ensure that there's not an easy out on these things. So certainty is really important, and that looks like, frankly, in the UK, but also in similar demographic countries, the Netherlands, Denmark, France, long-term plans for the gas grid and the decarbonisation of the gas grid and how government is bringing that supply down. And that doesn't necessarily look like a one-size-fits-all approach across the board. I think there's a real risk, and I engage, we're members of Eurogas at GRIS, and we engage as much as we can with the Commission on these matters, and it's a shame they're not here today, but there's a real risk of overcomplication, right? Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, biomethane costs somewhere between 80 and 90 euros a megawatt to produce. Natural gas is 35. Someone has got to meet that delta in pricing, and it's as simple as that. If you're trying to develop a market, then obligation-style schemes like the ones that are coming through in France and Netherlands and Denmark are great. If you're trying to get a market from basically non-existence to getting up, then revenue certainty is key. It's things like the renewable heat incentive that we had in the UK, feed-in tariffs similar to the schemes that Italy had. So it's at the risk of causing ruptures. It's not a pan-European problem. You've got to, the Commission's got to create the space for countries to do what is going to fit for their level of market development, and then provide long-term certainty to ensure those markets do develop. It's fixed it.
Yeah. Okay. Anna.
Yes. So I was going to answer California, same as Pat, and I agree with him that this was it's still been a big success that has enabled like unexpected growth. Obviously, this type of regulation is very positive for biomethane because biomethane competes very well on these carbon intensity rewarding systems. But I wanted to highlight that it's also good for the rest of fuels in the system. So electrification has increased, and also ethanol, biodiesel, they have decreased their carbon footprint based on these rewards of lower carbon intensity. So it's not just a specific measure for the biomethane sector, but also good for the transport sector in general. So this is a good practice that we are somehow copying in Europe. Germany has longer tradition, but some member states are including this type of carbon intensity score programs, which it seems it's the good direction to go. And looking at places beyond Europe, on a positive note, I would like to add that many emerging countries that are having a look at biogas, biomethane, they follow what Europe is doing because there's a lot of experience here and lessons that can be shared with other regions. But maybe on a more exotic note, I would maybe mention the India has very ambitious targets. One of the things they are focusing on is try to develop a market for the fertilizers, the organic fertilizers, they call it FOM, the fermented organic manure. And they're doing this by two tools. First is a regulatory recognition. So they have a new category for this type of organic fertilizer. And this can be a new product that is recognized in the system. And they also have financial support for the production, some rupees per kilogram of organic fertilizers they produce. Their aim is to create a market. Obviously, India is very dependent on imports of fertilizers, so this is a national strategy for them. But we've seen some new initiatives in other regions that can be inspiring too.
Okay.
If I could maybe comment on something Nick said. He said that biomethane costs 70 to 80 or 90. I think that's the wrong paradigm. I think that the industry has to look at it in terms of the carbon abatement cost it delivers. And it's not a form of energy, it's a form of carbon abatement. And I think that when you create carbon abatement markets, then like they did in California, it chooses the best option. And I recognize in Europe there's an energy security issue, and there might be other reasons to get the physical energy renewable and locally produced. But in terms of carbon abatement, I think that expressing the cost of biomethane in terms of its cost per energy is distorted, particularly because gas is, as an energy source, quite cheap, but it's very difficult to abate carbon. And I think if you stack it up against other carbon abatement methods, it actually it shines. And particularly with carbon capture, it's awesome. And it's a case for investment, and that's why we're here in Europe investing.
Yeah, I mean, nothing you've said is wrong, Pat, but it's, you know, as we know from a number of the things that we work on together, you know, all renewables are created equal, but some are more equal than others. And, you know, it's an uphill struggle in the UK, in Europe, elsewhere, to get that kind of wider circumstance measured, first and foremost, but then also valued in the right way. So, yeah, that has to be the end game, completely. Pat's completely right. I would say, though, at 70 to 90 pounds a megawatt hour, noting the fact that you can valorise things like fertiliser, CO2 removals, to hopefully bring that price down over time. You know, in the UK, there's plenty we can do on the operational expenditure of plants as well. We still have to add propane to get the gas into the grid. But even at that price, and I think, you know, this is where groups like Eurogas become so important, the benefit of gas as an energy vector in doing the hardest 10 to 20% of the decarbonised ecosystem is massive, and is something that we as an industry have not been particularly good at demonstrating. So in the UK, we've got a Professor Michael Liebrick. He's not the biggest fan of hydrogen, if you do hydrogen, but you know, Michael has spoken quite openly about that last 10% piece. And you know, for renewable gases, that has to be where we focus our efforts. It's what are the things that we are unaffordable to do otherwise. And yes, that might be part of a wider network of gaseous fuels, including fossil gas, blue hydrogen. Whatever delivers the best benefit for the end consumer is really where we need to go.
Yeah, so interested to both of you, saying that we need to think, I guess there's different ways of framing renewable gases. And as you say, if you frame it as a carbon abatement rather than an energy source, you get a completely different picture also of the cost associated with it. And if we, so following up from, okay, you've all good examples of what's going well outside Europe, what about within Europe? We do have a whole bunch of countries, the EU27, the UK, let's take Europe in a broader sense. It's still part of Europe. What's best practice here? Anna?
I've been recently very interested in tracking what's been done in Denmark on methane leakage. Especially because at the end of last year, there was a new report by the Joint Research Center. They were evaluating and updating their values on fugitive emissions in biogas biomethane plants, and it was a bit higher than what they had accounted for in previous default and typical values that are at the core of RED 2. So at some point, it's likely that these typical default values are going to be increased, taking into account these methane emissions that are caused by leakage. The good news is that they also looked at ways that are effective in reducing this. And if we take into account, for example, the gas sector that you're experts on, the emissions, the fugitive emissions are very low, are around 1%. In biogas, the average is between 2-7%. So there's an opportunity to reach lower values as industry, the biogas industry evolves, improves, and gets to better quality standards. There's a very effective measure. It's the leak detection and repair programs that Denmark is putting in place. They had a pilot program, and it seems that they were effective in reducing it to around 1% leakage. So the good news is that there are ways to do it. In the reports, they mentioned that this could be profitable because in the end, it increases the final product that you're selling. So we see that this is a trend that is going to be to stay. So the sector is going to be more scrutinized on their methane leakage emissions, also in line with the methane pledges, reduction pledges, etc. So this is aligned with other trends in the climate agenda. Good to learn from these good practices.
And do you know why Denmark? Are there other places, or is there something particular that makes it?
Not very sure what triggered the initiative. It's true that Denmark is they have a very advanced technology levels at their plants, and they've improved their quality standards very much. So not very sure what triggered that.
The Danish are an example to follow in many ways on biogas, and in particular in that kind of long-term plan for the grid point as well. But one way in which we can reduce methane slippage at sites quite easily is post-membrane liquefaction of CO2. So currently we're upgrading biogas to biomethane to inject into the grid. That CO2 is currently vented, but it's an obvious kind of source of biogenic CO2 in future. And that's the bit that I would probably say, it's rare for me to praise the UK. We've made some pretty interesting decisions in the last decade or so. But CCUS is one where it's starting to look like we might be getting it right. So, again, Pat's point about the GHG valuation of the gas ultimately in the UK and other parts of Europe, Denmark is another example, the ability to relatively inexpensively store biogenic CO2 and then possibly sell those removals to foreign markets is a means to subsidise our own energy production in that country or in the EU, which is quite exciting. We were going through a period of kind of policy development on that in the UK at the moment, but if we see some stretching targets on that before the end of the decade, that could be quite material. The task force did a report about 3 months ago that said we could do about 12 BCM of removals in the UK, 12 BCM of biomethane in the UK by 2050. Just for reference, that's 18 million tonnes of removals a year off the upgraders alone. If you put that in a system with power CCS, industrial CCUS, you're talking about up to 40 million tonnes of biogenic removals every year. That's more than the UK's annual aviation emissions. So you've just decarbonised aviation and you've got energy on tap and you've got a load of renewable fertiliser as well, and it's relatively inexpensive.
Yeah, we're quite interested and excited in what the UK has done in SAF, and they basically put in a couple of things. One is a pure play greenhouse gas based metric. So it's not part energy, part greenhouse. It's all greenhouse gas, which means if you can come with a very low greenhouse gas emissions fuel, if you save twice the amount of carbon, you get twice the number of credits. And we're involved, and the UK is, while they're doing that, investing in carbon capture resources. I think the UK is reversing the North Sea flows with gas coming out, replacing it with CO2 going back. And that's creating an opportunity to create removals along with energy production. And I think when you combine that in biofuels in hard-to-abate sectors, it's a really tremendous combination. The other thing they are doing is implementing an RCM, a revenue certainty mechanism. So they're looking at domestic facilities, creating some type of contract for difference structure, so that these SAF facilities would be very large and complex. That would help get a facility over the hump on its financing.
Okay.
And one thing I would say, it's not exactly Europe, but I think what the IMO is doing is tremendous. And I think that the IMO is implementing a worldwide shipping greenhouse gas index, technology neutral framework. And nobody can say the other country gets an advantage. It forces everybody to action. And I think it's really going to change the playing field in biofuels globally, and it's going to be very good for biomethane as well.
Okay, thank you for those examples. I've seen Antoine would like the floor. We'll get you a microphone. In the meantime, could we get a microphone up here? Otherwise, I'll give you one. Can we lend them? Let's lend them one of ours. In the meantime, is there anyone else? I don't think... Yeah, over there. Yeah.
Thank you, Nick. Well, I didn't expect fertilizers to be so prominent here, so I hope Andreas will not ask to split the cost of the barbecue. Just quick comments. Anna, you are absolutely right about this fermented manure you've said. In Europe, we call it digestate. It's being used also in Europe. There is one thing we should not forget, that these nutrients, they were already coming to the fields as manure. So now they will come as digestates, but it's not new nutrients coming. So for the whole agricultural balance of nutrients, that doesn't reduce the need for mineral fertilizers, just to keep in mind. Nick, you've mentioned around 35 euros or dollars for gas and to compare with biogas. The brutal business reality that my member fertilizer producers are having is that we have to compare with Egypt and Algeria. That is $4 per megawatt hour. These are our competitors, and if we die, they come in. And then you've mentioned rightfully, Nick, that we have to look at the cost of abatement, actually. That's true, but for this we have in Europe a market for cost of abatement, ETS, so let's let ETS do its job, isn't it?
Okay, gentleman just next door, just literally one across.
So,
yeah.
Thank you. My question goes to Pat Foodie. I'm really glad to see that you're succeeding in giving the transition a point and making it possible somehow. But how does that work together if you compare it to European markets, when you say, okay, we have no subsidy scheme itself, at least not on OPEX costs, but only on CAPEX costs, when you have a budget shortfall in California of 12 billion euros, $12 billion. So how do you pay those gap payments to enable everything? So is it only credit card, or do you have a repayment method?
Okay, we'll take the final question there. Andre in the middle.
Sorry.
Just bear with us a second. And I think that'll be it for questions to give
Thank you, Andre Bill, independent consultant from Estonia. I just have a small remark to Anna, but also the comment in general. Welcome to REACT, of course, but it's pretty unfair to compare methane leakages from biogas to methane leakages in fossil industries for two reasons, or three reasons. First of all, oil and gas industry is so huge, is global, and there is a big part of oil and gas industry which is not reported, that is not known to us, how much they're venting, how much there are leakages, when they replace the flaring by venting, and so on. Once you go to some authoritarian regimes, you will have it more. There's going to be less transparency, and the fact that you have detected 7% in biogas plants in Europe and way less there is because they are less transparent. Second reason is obviously oil and gas industry is bigger. So 1% in oil and gas industry is definitely more than even 10% in biogas. And final, we have to understand biogas is part of the natural cycle. Methane emission would have happened anyway, and because we have cattle or we have grass or whatever we have. And this is part of the natural cycle. That's not the same when you extract something from under the earth and either vent it or flare it. And the fact that we have 7% think the other way, it means that 93% of the possible biogas emissions that would happen anyway have been actually reduced. So it would be, I would be very careful in comparing the two. There's nothing to do between each other, actually. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to pick up on that final?
I can answer that one. So the reference for the 1% in the gas industry was maybe just a reference for like technical possibilities. So it's how low we could go. Well, there's an industrial sector dealing with the same type of molecule that reaches this low level. So there's the technology, the type of valves, the know-how. So this is probably something that policymakers are going to take into account if they eventually include these updates in the typical values, etc. So it's a reference for technology know-how. It's true that the sector, in terms of size or even industrial development, has nothing to do, but it's a good learning opportunity from the fossil gas sector. And referring to the biomethane, obviously this is biogenic biomethane, but still being methane 27, 28, depending on what conversion factor you use, times more harming than CO2, then it adds very quickly. And normally in the European regulations, you already take into account the methane avoidance from animal manure, from treating the animal manure. So you're counting that bonus from treating it. So that eats up a little bit the bonus that you already have. Not so risky in the case of animal manure because it comes from very negative values. But in the case of bio-waste, the new updated values were a bit on the edge of the threshold for the European directive. So something that eventually can become a threat for certain plants, depending on the feedstock they're treating. Something to have in mind and maybe to get prepared for, because this is a trend that we're seeing there.
Yeah, just very quickly, because I'm sure Pat will want to come in as well on a few things there. On kind of the circular economy and the use of digester, take the point that you're always going to have some reliance on fossil-based fertilisers, but equally striving to be as resource efficient as you can is a broadly sensible thing to do. And what holds true for manure-based digestion isn't necessarily the case for other forms of digestion that might be relying on other products. So, for me, honestly, manure's got a huge role to play because of the upstream methane emission savings you have just described. But if we're serious about materiality, we need to reset the narrative on how this industry supports sustainable agriculture to boost food production, improve soil health, lock more carbon in the soil, and get carbon abatement and an energy industry as a byproduct. It's crucial. They're doing it really well in France. Parts of America are doing it really sensibly as well. And then finally, on the point about gas prices, biomethane is more expensive than natural gas, and natural gas in Europe is more expensive than it is pretty much anywhere else in the world right now. But I'm not sure that biomethane production is making our gas price more expensive. I think we need to address the root causes of that. What I've seen in the UK from some of the modelling work we have done is that actually the benefit of biomethane's argument is saying that we cannot do everything, we cannot produce enough of this to fully displace natural gas. Actually, it is the use of biomethane in tandem with resource-efficient electrification systems, hybrid heat pumps, industrial hybrids, etc., that are going to bring costs down. So, I would urge kind of consideration of how those techs can work together.
Yeah, we're an investor in the space, a technology developer in the space. We focus on the highest value uses, which isn't fertilizer. It's generally transportation fuels. But the rules are the same. Carbon capture is relatively cheap, and I think that fertilizer producers should be thinking of carbon capture, particularly as the ETS price gets more stringent. It's the natural first step. I think it's worth noting that biomethane is totally seamless and can be a next step if you run out of ability to abate. We're particularly interested in integrating carbon capture into hard-to-abate fuel supply sectors. And the way the regulatory frameworks are created, there's a different silo between industrial emissions and transport emissions. So we target on the more difficult, more costly part. And I didn't quite understand the leakage. I didn't exactly hear you, but within the frameworks in which the regulated frameworks in which we operate, we need to take demerits for lost methane. It goes to the CI score of any facility. The facilities I work with don't want to see their valuable biomethane exhausted, so they put controls in place to prevent it. And in the baseline country where a lot of the biomethane I work with comes from in the United States, they have a measurement system where they go out and they study and try to every year determine the amount of biomethane lost, and that goes into the national baseline. So I think as an industry, we should all realize that methane is a climate pollutant and that emissions, unabated emissions, should cost the CI score in the baseline and in production. And all of that should be incorporated into whatever incentive system gets adopted.
And the question about California's $12 billion shortfall, the cost of California's, gentleman here at the front, the cost of implementing a scheme like in California, is that something that ultimately is, is feasible here, given the cost of it to the state?
So again, I focus on the transport system. The California system is all ultimately borne by the consumers. Refiners are obligated parties. They have to retire credits. Credits have a cost, and it's all embedded in the cost ultimately to the consumers. So there's no subsidy per se, but there's a credit value to abatement. And I think the same happens in Europe under the RED system in transport. If you use biomethane directly as a transport fuel, you're able to generate a fuel credit, which competes head for head against biodiesel or HVO, and isn't exactly a subsidy. It's just its own market for carbon abatement. And carbon abatement isn't fossil fuel use. They're different markets. That's the way I think of it.
Okay. Yeah, but clearly, it carries a cost. We're going to have to wrap up. Maybe just a quick closer from each of you, 30 seconds or a minute max. We've been looking ahead 1 year. Let's look ahead a bit further. 5 years, 2030. We're back here. It's potentially even hotter. Hopefully not. Where do we want to be then?
So I guess for 5 years, and changing a bit the topic from biomethane, that what we need to see is some hydrogen demand support for, and maybe the priority would be current uses of hydrogen in non-energy uses. That would be the first step. And in 5 years, we don't see a clear advance in that level, that's going to risk the whole scale up of hydrogen. So this is maybe something to keep in mind for the coming 5 years.
Risk of being extremely controversial. I think a bit of a rethink on the feedstocks that are allowed under RED, Annex 9, and how that can actually enable energy security on the continent and bring costs down. Currently, as that legislation fits, it's extremely restrictive. It's driving a number of quite perverse policy outcomes. Member states are falling out with it left, right, and centre. Actually, and I think hopefully this is something that you and I agree on, that move to a complete greenhouse gas accounting methodology with some factoring of land use change within that, so you're not impacting food crops, is where we need to go and is where the global trend will go. So, Europe has been a leader on a lot of things. The UK has been a leader on a lot of things. We need to pick up that mantle again, not get left behind.
Yeah, we're bullish about Europe, bullish about the UK, particularly its carbon capture resources. We're investing in the UK in SAF, and we have a technology for aggregating biogas, the CO2 and the methane, into central facilities that permit CO2 abatement, and we're focusing on electricity conversions. So, for instance, Germany has 10,000 biogas plants making electricity. We envision putting a compressor at each site, loading it onto truck into a big central facility with carbon capture. And it has great economics in the context of the RED targets already. We think Europe is well suited for a lot of the type of technologies we bring.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, all three of you, very much. And thank you. A big round of applause. Thank you for bearing with us. That leaves me, you guys can go and take a breather. That leaves me just to introduce Andreas Gut, as Secretary General of Eurogas, to close up for today and hand you all over to the barbecue. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Sonia. And I have some good news. I promise I will be extremely short because I don't think I've ever been at a conference where I've heard so many people say they crave for beer. Frankly, at this point, I do too. But I do have some thank yous and some formalities to go through, so bear with me just literally 2 minutes. I think, first of all, thank you to Antoine for the great offer to think about how we can finance this conference going forward. We can continue that discussion, but on that note, I'd like to say a special thanks to our sponsor. So far, we have been able to cover this with our members, so special thanks to SEFE for actually helping us realize this conference once again this year, this third edition after. And I'd like to say also 35 years of Eurogas, which is what we're celebrating this year, and hopefully we'll get 35 more years on this. But also special thanks to Sonia. I don't actually see you. You're hiding there. Special thanks to Sonia for once again moderating our session today, all the speakers, and of course also the team that has made this possible behind the scenes. So maybe a round of applause for everybody who's involved in this. Thanks so much. And quite honestly, if anybody has ever doubted the level of commitment of this industry to decarbonization of the sector, I think you only have to look through this room. The fact that so many have stayed with us through these 3 sessions today is a testament to the commitment of this industry. So absolutely recognize that this hasn't been the most easy climate in the room to go through this. So I'll skip through some of this, but I think one point that is important to mention is today has been special also for a number of other reasons. So we've had the launch of the EU Energy and Raw Materials Platform. We've had the launch of, or the proposal for the 2040 climate targets. And it's quite interesting. I mean, there seems to be, of course, a commitment to renewable gases. There was a meeting this morning. You mentioned it with Kitty. We also had our discussions with the European Commission on biomethane developments together with our national association members this morning. So there's a lot happening and hopefully will continue to happen because ultimately the level of the challenge is gigantic. We have to achieve twice as much in the coming years in half the time than we had so far in terms of what we've achieved in decarbonization. And so clearly, from our perspective, the gas sector, renewable and low carbon gases, will have to play a fundamental role in this challenge. I think that much is obvious, and we will continue working on this. Now, a few formalities. Today we will be cooking on renewable biopropane, so kindly supported by Prima Gas and one of our members, SHV Energy. So thanks so much for making that possible as well. Hopefully the weather stays. I know we have some thunderstorms forecasted potentially. I can obviously not see how the weather's like, but hopefully it holds. And then just the final point on the process for the renewable gas barbecue. There won't be any formal speeches, so I can reassure you of that. But I will ask for maybe 5 minutes of your attention towards the end, around 8:30, when we will announce the winner of the renewable gas barbecue competition. As always, we have 2 chefs that are competing for the first prize. And for that, we need your help. So there are QR codes scattered around the conference venue. Scan them, please, and vote on the best dish. By the way, we're also asking for the feedback on this conference, so we're hoping to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And with that, I'm really happy to close the conference and open the barbecue. Thank you so much for being with us.